Greetings, everybody. This is the fireside for the week of July 20, ending in July 20th, 2025. This has been one of the best weeks that we've had in a long time as a country, and by that I mean about a year. So this video is going to be part fireside, part conceptual. I'm not going to be talking about a lot of the blow-by-blow of the news cycle, because that's kind of been drowned out for now. We don't hear a lot about the day-to-day stuff right now. What we're hearing about is something that's absolutely stunning, and that is that the cult of MAGA is starting to break. The cult of MAGA is starting to break. Think about those words. Think about them. I think that a lot of you never expected to be hearing that. Never expected to hear that. A lot of us, a lot of people like me, never that oppose him in this case. There's a lot of, I use that word in a lot of different senses, but a lot of people that oppose Trump like I do thought that that would never happen. And this is going to be part conceptual, and it's going to be obviously the news that took place. There's some bittersweet elements of this as well for me, because I actually, honestly, this was a little bit unexpected to me, and I'll tell you why later, but it was more expected to me than it was for most of these people, most of the other people that oppose Trump. So, but let's take a moment of silence first before we get into it. So what is happening here, what I think is happening, is that here's my basic concept of what just happened this week, and the previous week, because I've been away for a while and I gotta knock that off. But what's happening here is that people join cults or whatever they are. They join movements. This one's pretty culty. People join movements for reasons, and if they're large enough, there's going to be some common reasons why people join. And you know, the cult movements and gangs and things like that, paramilitaries, and there's a lot of senses in which Trumpism is or contains things like that. They have hazing rituals at the beginning. They do try, and they're successful. They do put a lot of effort into breaking the identity and the values of the people that enter them writ large. Breaking and discrediting their values. They do. And they do that through hazing rituals. And so, in the case of Trumpism, most of his supporters were Christians when they went in, or they say that they are. I think that a lot of them are not true believers, probably. I don't know people's hearts, and a lot of them are true believers, but they're just deeply, deeply unhealthy and they've been that way their whole lives, and they don't understand that what they need is a lot of psychological help from their friends in the church and from professionals and support groups. They don't understand that. They think that their miserable way of living is normal, and because it's all they've known for their whole life. And this is a lot of what we would talk about as the fear the world church, rather than the love the world church. The fear the world church is like this. It's basically an organization of, that's a very, very loose way to call it. It's a phenomenon of millions of people that have lived their entire lives in generational trauma, collective trauma. Because again, what happened over the past century to the church, basically. And it happened to a lot of us, but we experienced it together in a way that some of the smaller groups, they had more unique experiences. They may not have, even a lot of immigrants, they may not have even been present here. But a lot of the white church in the US and Europe over the 20th century, what was your experience of the 20th century if you were there? You lived through the world wars, which were basically a series of nationalist or almost fascist movements in the First World War that we don't talk about because they were overshadowed later. But like, these were monarchist movements that were seeking to impose empire inside of Europe, and there was a lot of this thought even in the Allied nations as well. They just had maritime empires, and they did exploit a lot of people. But it was the application of these imperial ideas, including ideas that are similar to ones that we had in the Confederacy. There was a reason why the Germans were trying to do intelligence operations on us, but at that time they were kind of like the Russians are today. They were very experienced with that stuff, but they basically, we had these proto-fascist imperialist movements, and they drafted us into their wars with each other. This was one of the first major wars, other than the Napoleonic Wars and the 7 Years' War. But really, this was the first, this was really the first major war that took place in which people, this is something that I have to stress, in which people that believed in the same faith, for instance, the Germans and the British, were drafted, they were conscripted into armies and weaponized against each other. And that pattern would continue through the rest of the 20th century. So that was the First World War. The Second World War, what you had was ideological groups, other than the Western one, the American one. But this kind of trauma spreads around and sloshes around. And we have our own experience. I'll get to it later. But I'm trying to explain where the Fear the World Church came from. So you have these groups, the fascists in Germany, who were very much, they believed in races and race science, which isn't actually science, but they thought it was. They believed in, Hitler himself believed that Jesus was some kind of Aryan fighter that was born from that was created by a Roman soldier and wasn't Jewish at all. That's what he believed about Jesus, and he focused on him going in and attacking the money changers, and that was basically his whole understanding of Jesus. So he was far from a Christian. This whole movement was far from Christianity. They made petty jabs at Christianity. They aligned with it, but they made petty jabs at it, like scheduling Hitler Youth on Sunday in order to make it so that people wouldn't be able to go to church. You had the communists, who were also atheistic by policy, and not so much on the American side. We still held to old school liberalism and communitarianism back then. We believed in a balance between the interests of the individual and the interests of the community. And so we were, which is a much more Christian way of doing politics. And this was the period of the New Deal. But what you had in the world wars was that, but there was a nascent consumerist, sort of hyper-capitalist strain in the United States as well. That goes back to the 20s. And it was present. And so you had those three groups sort of duking it out with each other. And then the winners of that, the communists, and the winners of that struggle, and they used our bodies to do that. They drafted our young men in fighting these wars with each other, especially on the Eastern Front, which was viciously brutal, fought almost entirely with Christians operating under the command of people who were not Christian. And it was probably the bloodiest war in human history, certainly per capita, was World War II in the East. And then, so after that, you have two groups that win. You have the communists in the East, and then within about 20 years of the end of the World War II, the hyper-capitalist, consumerist sort of movement in the United States becomes the movement that's basically runs American culture and eventually politics as well. And so you have the winners of these wars, who are also, again, not Christian, and in both countries, with about a 20 to 30 year time delay, they drain out the prosperity and the industrial base of the countries that they, and the halves of the world that they control to some degree. There's varying degrees of it. There's Estonia and Lithuania, which are prosperous on our side. There's the South on the Soviet side. There's the South, and there's the American South and the American Midwest, places like Nebraska and Minnesota and Colorado and Oregon and Sweden and Northern Europe. But so basically what your life has been is, if you are over the 20th century, what your family history has been, if you're somebody that is deep in the church or that's in the church, over the 20th century and into this century, is repeatedly getting dominated by people that are hostile to the things that you believe and getting used in their struggles. And every time they end up failing, they end up causing a bunch of suffering, and yet they never leave power. And that is where the fear the world church, frankly, comes from, more than anything else. And so you have these people that live, and so when you live in an environment like that, when you're surrounded by decay, when you have probably a certain amount of generational trauma in the home, and these places, obviously, in a lot of ways, it's worse outside to be a child outside than it is even to be a child inside the church. But again, parents that lived through deindustrialization, or maybe if they're immigrant, if you have an immigrant family that lived through the Second World War, or things like that, they are not going to make the best parents. And so what you have is the complete, you have an environment in which it's very easy to have a very cynical view of the world, a very cynical view of life. And that, among other things, is that's one of that definitely created. And then I'm going to talk about specific problems as well. And this is why what we're seeing now is happening. Those specific problems that they notice, things like the addiction crisis in this country, and things like rape culture, which is ironic, but we'll talk about that. So they care a lot about these kinds of things. They don't really, and yet they care about them, and at the same time they have been punished their whole lives for caring about things, because they've always been out of power, and their priorities have never been really considered. They haven't been listened to, and and a lot of that also has to do with not having access to education as much. Because if you're able to hold on to your belief system, this is a big if you're able to hold on to your beliefs and not just go along with the crowd, education and learning can be a great opportunity to break out of the fear the world church, and to be able to believe in the things that you believe, and care about the things that you care about, and not become cynical. And to be able to argue to other people. But when you don't have education, when you don't know what you're talking about, things remain inarticulate. You're voiceless. And that's what these people were. And so they had grievances about a bunch of things, including the economy, which is why a lot of them voted for Barack Obama and for Democrats for a long time. But they also cared about the social issues, like the opioid crisis and the addiction crisis in general. They cared about rape culture and over-sexualization. And it's all kind of a cluster of things. All of those things are related to each other. But they cared about these kinds of things. In a lot of ways, they're similar to us. They're similar to what we could be, even if they're not similar to us as leftists. They're similar to what we could be, and what I frankly believe we should be. There are things that they could do less with. There is a lot of racial prejudice as well. They have these things that they care about, and they're impossible to really address in the two-party system that we have. And so they have the temptation to go to somebody who did a good job branding himself, at least once he entered the presidential campaign, not so much before. as the kind of Christian Democrat that they want in all ways except one. And that was the way that he spoke about and treated and described migrants. That was the one political position that he really had that was radically against what any Christian Democratic Party like the American Solidarity Party or any such party around the world. There are ones that actually have power and govern. That is the one thing that he said that was very much different from that. That is the one way in which he was different, and the far right is different, and it's cultish, is that it asks its Christian followers to sin against immigrants. And that right there is it's a loyalty test. It is a hazing ritual. And it's the reason why you've seen the behavior from them that you expected, that you've grown to expect, where they just fall in line with him over and over and over again, the rank and file MAGA. But it's breaking now, and the reason why it's breaking is because we're getting to issues now with the failure of the immigration policy and them mulling over the idea of keeping these people in the country and simply depriving them of their rights and having them do the same work. They are mulling that idea right now as we get to the core issues of we don't want cheap labor. We don't want exemptions to the tariffs. We don't want to deregulate. We want regulation. That's why we like tariffs, because we don't like that stuff's going to other countries and manufacturing is going to other countries and it's not regulated. That's not fair. Any number of these things. But especially the economic things. But now we're getting into the cultural things. Now we're getting into rape culture. Now we're getting into things that are tangential to the addiction crisis, and which we've all experienced. People that were addicts around us or that were with us. Now we're getting into things that are adjacent to over-sexualization. Now we're getting into the cultural stuff. And that was the stuff that always drove them into the arms of Trump. It's the stuff that Trump promised that no Democrat, not even Bernie Sanders, promised. Like Bernie Sanders was all about for a long time. Tariffs and against free trade. But this is stuff that you could only get in America anyway, in 2016 America, from some bespoke third party or from Trump. That was the only place that you could get it from. And so now we're getting to the areas in which the actual reasons that people got in, like J6, the attempt to overthrow the government, the possibility of not having elections or fair ones in the future, that was not enough to get those people to be willing to leave, because they had already sold their souls by hating immigrants. They had already sold their souls by indulging in racist rhetoric that they knew was wrong and that they would not have tolerated at other times in their lives. A lot of them. Some of them would. But a lot of them wouldn't. And they sold their souls in that way. But once you get to the original reason, that is something in their head that they've held on to continuously since before the hazing ritual. They wanted to deal with over-sexualization. They wanted to deal with the opioid crisis and the addiction crisis and our mental health crisis and rape culture even. They would have described it in different terms. They wanted to deal with that kind of stuff. They believed in conspiracy theories, heck. I know a lot of people do believe in conspiracy theories. I think that when you disempower a group of people, that's one of the things that happen, along with the other things that I described when I talked about the Fear the World Church in the 20th century. This is one of the things that happens. You get paranoia. But so you're getting to things that were there, that pre-existed the hazing ritual, that were there, that were maintained because they weren't pruned away, because they were part of the cult. They were part of the experience of being in the cult. But they came from before the cult. They were why the person joined in the first place. And those things, I have said for a long time in private on YouTube, that it is all about why they got into MAGA. And there are people that got in because they wanted cruelty, and those people are inaccessible. But a lot of people joined MAGA because they liked specific things that Trump said. They liked policies that he promised, which he never delivered on. They liked certainly raising taxes on the rich, but they also liked tariffs and the idea of not having other countries steal away our manufacturing simply by having lower labor standards or environmental standards. Like, that's not fair. People recognize that. People don't want their stuff made by slave labor. Who's more likely to do that if you're voting in 2016? Let's be honest with ourselves. Let's be honest. Who's going to be more likely, at least if he wasn't such a liar, to make it so that some more of your stuff is made by people in dignity rather than slave labor? It's Trump, which is bizarre, because again, he is a liar, and he doesn't practice that in his personal life, but that is what you would think, most people would think in 2016. There were a lot of people that were tempted to vote for him and didn't vote for him because of things like that. But most importantly, they wanted cultural peace. They wanted an end to the culture wars. They wanted a truce in the culture wars. And he only ever inflamed the culture wars, but he promised victory in those proverbial wars. And so people that were weary of this after decades, they supported him. And they wanted these cultural issues to get addressed. And this is bittersweet for me. This is a bittersweet moment because I have said this stuff in private. I've said it in comment sections. I might read some of those comments on a live stream or something later on. And I will be getting to you with the pages of my paper, the final chapter. I wish that y'all were big enough audience to remind me of it, but I have been saying in private for years that, and I wish that I had been public about it, because I probably could have helped prevent this in the first place, that this was how you got MAGA out, was that you gave them lives worth living. And that for the ones that actually believe in it, that are true believers, that aren't just all about cruelty, for the people that want things out of Trump, and they supported him because of that, because of actual things that he said, for the people that were for that we could reach them, even if they were deep in the cult. We could reach them to the degree that they wouldn't have voted for Trump in the primaries, that he would have never even gotten close to winning the election. If I had made that public, if that was something that was part of the social debate, I think that it would have changed the results of the election, at least somewhat. if it had gone viral enough. And I wish I had done that. I wish I'd put my effort into it. A lot of people would have said that I was wrong, but like, we live in the counterfactual, and the guy did win because we didn't do the kinds of things that I was suggesting. And then when he stabbed them in the back on those things, when he stabbed them in the back on culture, on their desire to get the Epstein files released, which is the first time in this whole video that I've mentioned specifically what happened. When he promised to do that and he failed, and he chose not to, and he chose not to because of who he is. But it was like a light switch flipped. All of that Russian disinformation that allowed them to justify voting for him after he stabbed them back in 2016. That tape, that Access Hollywood tape, I can tell you from the perspective of somebody that is like a lot of ways, that is like one of these Fear the World Church people that voted for Trump by about an 80% margin. That was a fucking, pardon my French, that was a stab in the back. That was a stab in the back that happened there. But they put up with it because of the Russian disinformation that said, oh, 4 hours later we're going to come out with another bunch of emails, and Hillary's no better, by the way. And it did work. It worked. It got a lot of them to do it anyway. This stuff, I didn't really understand the power of this disinformation until I started to study the first Trump term again, the legitimate Trump term before J6, before he became disqualified. And it was a doozy studying that term, reading up on that term and on that election. And like, a lot of this stuff really was powerful. He probably wouldn't have won. I accept the legitimacy of the actual ballots that were cast, but he probably would not have won if it wasn't for all of that media help by Russia. And that was one of the things, like, everybody believed that that would be the end of Trump because he alienated some of the core members of his cult. And it probably, and the counterfactual, like, we see what's going on with Epstein now. Imagine if that had happened then. Like, he probably would not, Hillary, as much of a flawed, broken candidate as she was, and I don't think she would have been particularly great for this country based on our record that we experienced with her husband. Repealed Glass-Steagall, repealed gambling laws that apply in ways that applied to banks. Alan Greenspan. I could name probably a dozen things easily if I wanted to. Bill Clinton was not a good president. He's one of the main reasons, I believe, that we're in this mess. I don't think Hillary would have been good for the country. Probably better than Trump. But who knows, maybe COVID was something we needed to experience. And Trump was the only way that could have ever happened. But she probably would have won if it wasn't for that disinformation. But what we're seeing now is that people like me that did believe in them, and logically we had no reason to, we were right all along, and we were actually more right than we imagined, because I didn't believe that the MAGA people would break from Trump, frankly. And this is one of the main reasons I started this channel. I didn't believe that the MAGA people that I talk about, people like the Fear the World Church, would break from him until they had an alternative vision. Look around you. There ain't no alternative vision. And yet these people are breaking off anyway. So these people that have been part of a cult, and they have sold their soul in a lot of ways, are better than I gave them credit for, and I was one of the people that gave them a lot more credit. And so now with the theoretical stuff out of the way, so what does this mean for the future? First of all, we're going to talk about what actually happened. So, DOJ drags their feet on the Epstein files after promising them. Doesn't release anything. Trump tries to make it go away. Pisses off his supporters even more. People start leaking. I'm sure that a lot of that information is getting sequestered away in safe places where it's not going to get destroyed by low-level employees. This has backfired for him spectacularly. And this has weakened his movement. Who knows how long he's going to stay in power. And we'll talk about that a little later. They just leaked to the press photos of scans of letters and drawings that he made to Epstein, which strongly imply that he has molested minors. Which is a wild thing to say about the self-proclaimed President of the United States. That we have somebody that signs executive orders that is also a molester. Or somebody that takes advantage of teenagers. Which is probably who he was taking advantage of. I don't think that, from what I've heard of him, that he has an interest in prepubescent children, but even if he did, we would probably not know about it. And that's not something that has to do with his character, by the way. If he did, he would undoubtedly molest prepubescent kids. He does not have a sense of right and wrong. He just follows whatever he desires. So, yeah. Absolutely wild that we're even talking about this. But there's letters that strongly indicate that. And so what does this mean for the future? We have definitely a decline in power from Trump himself. And this is at least a temporary decline in the power of the entire regime, the entire self-proclaimed Trump administration. In the longer term, this could be something that I would not necessarily... I don't know. Because Congress is certainly still rolling over like no tomorrow for Trump. But he may be impeached. There might be some kind of money-related deal in which he steps down. But I doubt that because he's too egotistical. He's probably going to be replaced by J.D. Vance if he steps down, because I doubt they're going to impeach J.D. Vance. They don't have problems with any of these people on principle. And I know that there's a motive. I mean, Putin and a lot of the people that surround him, including in Trump's circle, have been very disappointed for the last couple of months since Operation Spiderweb. which was the destruction of some Siberian stuff using a Trojan horse attack by Ukraine, some Siberian military equipment, air equipment, but I would be very concerned if J.D. Vance came to power, because he is not demented, he's competent. And he is somebody, of all the people, I don't think he would have only participated in J6, but I think that if he was in Trump's position, he would have been willing to do J6. He seems like somebody that is absolutely committed to power at all costs. This is going to be somebody that we're going to need to impeach very quickly. And that's going to require a general strike if it happens. So let's pray. What we can do now is pray that the status quo stays the way that it is, and that Vance doesn't come to power for a long enough time that we can continue to build our strength. And in the meantime, this is very good news. Frankly, if worse comes to worse, we'll have an authoritarian regime, and the people that have guns and that are in militias will actually be on our side, which is nice. This opens up a lot of opportunities and a lot of risks for us. And so we're definitely going to have to pray. We're definitely going to have to talk to anybody that you know that cares about this kind of stuff. I mean, honestly, we've gotten to a place where the hardcore MAGA are more disgusted with him than probably the average Republican. And that is a beautiful place to be in, because the hardcore MAGA, by and large, are people that believe in things. But definitely have conversations. And definitely talk about this in your groups. Talk about opportunities with these people in any organizations that you participate in, because this is a great opportunity, and it is something that we're all going to need to acquaint ourselves with. This is not something that any of us were expecting. I was expecting it more, but I still wasn't expecting it. And so, in any case, God bless you all. It's been a little bit long, both the video itself and how long it's been. Take care. I hope that you will all be safe in these next couple of turbulent months that we have. And this has been a good week. Praise God. It's the first week that I can really say that with a straight face. Let's keep praise God, keep up the good work. Take care.